All right, welcome to another episode of Closers or Losers. Jeremy Miner, founder, no longer the chairman of Seventh Level, and our new chairman, our CEO, Matt Ryder. We're working from home, I see. It seems like when we do the podcast, you're always working from home. What's going on? You just never...
Thursdays, buddy. I work from home on a Thursday.
Oh, goodness gracious. All right. So today we want to go over a subject. So we typically, every week, we pick a different subject that we typically see in our DMs, or maybe our DM team shows us, or somebody keeps posting on YouTube, questions that they ask over and over again. So what question does everybody want to know that we're going to cover today?
There were a couple, but the overwhelming one was the real reasons why prospects don't call back. So what are
the
they?
real reasons
What are we
why
doing?
a prospect doesn't call back? Well,
Yeah.
let's talk. I mean, let's just talk about. I mean, it's any industry. There's many different reasons why. I would say the first reason why is because when you call them, the message you're leaving typically triggers sales resistance or sounds super salesy, and prospects just don't want to call you back. I would say, in my mind, that's the number one reason.
What would be like when you say, "Oh, that's salesy"? Like, give me an example of how that would sound.
Well, it's just human conditioning, right? So let's talk about the psychology, and then let's talk about let's talk about why a prospect does that, and then let's talk about, I would say, like the words you guys are using possibly, or the questions you're asking, or your tone, which is triggering that. So one thing we have to understand is your prospects are being sold to all of the time, right? You know, like our client, Brandon Kane, always talks about in his book, Hook Point, How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World. Your prospects are really being sold to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, week after week, month after month. And typically when we say that, I notice a lot of people like, they kind of grimace, like, I'm not being sold to all the time. I only talk to 2 salespeople a week. But if you really think about it, when you wake up in the morning, besides going to the bathroom, what's the first thing you do?
Check your phone.
You check your phone, right? You get on social media, your Facebook, your IG, and you see what? You see ads trying to sell you something, right?
The average American clicks on 12 ads a week on Facebook alone.
I'd say just on one platform each. It's probably like, if they're on 3 different platforms, it's like
doesn't see clicks on, engages with an ad.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't even know that.
93% of all TikTok users have bought a product on TikTok.
Wow.
Right? Like directly from seeing an ad. And in Australia, people interact with 27 Facebook ads a week. It's one of the highest countries on the planet in terms of
one of the highest countries on the planet for Facebook ads.
People are being sold to, even when you drive down the freeway. What do you see? You see billboards. What are billboards doing? They're selling to you.
Yeah. You turn on the TV before you go to work, and you see what? Commercials trying to sell you something, right? You drive down the road, you turn on your radio, you hear what? Radio ads trying to sell you something. You get back on social media at lunch, or when you're going to the bathroom, you start scrolling through your phone and you see your aunt pitching her latest, greatest MLM opportunity. So you're constantly being sold to all of the time. And because of that, especially in the last 20 years with, internet and social media, what that's done is it's built up like a defensive mechanism in your prospect's mind, where anytime they feel or hear somebody that they feel is trying to sell them something, it instantly causes, it triggers sales resistance. We talk a lot about triggering sales resistance. So one thing we all have to understand as salespeople is that when you call a prospect back, whether they had a booked appointment with you and you're calling them, or let's say it was an outbound lead that you're calling, or even if it's a cold call and you're calling them, it's not like they're like so excited to call you back already, even if they've asked you to call them. Okay, so they already have that resistance. So your words, like the tone out of your mouth when you leave that voicemail, are going to determine if the prospect becomes curious enough to call you back. Okay. So if I called and I'm like, hey, John Smith, this is just Jeremy Miner. You responded to one of our ads about X, Y, and Z. I'm really super excited to call you. We're the market leader in this. Feel free to call me back today, blah, 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 blah. Talk to you then. What's their incentive? Like, I'm talking about my solution. We're the market leader. I'm super excited to talk to you. Well, just because you're super excited to talk to the prospect, does that mean the prospect's super excited to talk to you? Obviously not. So little things like that trigger sales resistance where they're like, oh, he's super excited to call me or she's super excited to talk to me. And so they just don't call back. And, when companies bring us in to like kind of audit that and we eventually get around to their voicemails are like really bad. What have you seen?
Yeah, I think I want to stay on that topic of sales resistance just for a minute. The way that I see it is it's kind of like it's a ticker that never goes down.
Yeah.
So whether it's in that call or in the context of the entire sales cycle, it's like when you go to present your offer, my opinion is no matter how good no matter what you do, sales resistance goes up because now you're presenting. Now this is like, oh, okay, I know what's happening. So like you have to keep the threshold. Everyone's got a threshold of what they'll accept in terms of sales resistance, and you're gonna potentially come up and meet that when you present, right? No matter how it's done, because you're asking for money. So you have to keep that really low because there's nothing that you can do to push that bar back down once it's been lifted. So that element of sales resistance is super important, and that's why, like, sometimes when we take on a new client, we might just work on them for the first month on the first 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Because they're so bad. Like, hey, this is just Matt from XYZ company, and we're really excited to talk to you today. Like they're Casey Kasem or something. And so I think it's one of those things. So, like, I guess from the psychological standpoint, from let's just say you're later on in the sales cycle, what are some of the, I guess, do's and don'ts that you have to do like in between calls to make sure that you give yourself the best opportunity to be able to get that person back on the phone?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that for a second because I know what's probably going on in every salesperson's mind is right now is like, well, how do I tailor my voicemail? Like, what do I need to say where I don't sound super salesy? And then let's come back to that because I think you just brought up a really good question.
Yeah.
In between, especially if you're selling B2B and you're setting up different appointments, like how do you keep that process rolling? So when you leave a message, you want to leave a message that gets the prospect into what we call results-based thinking. Okay, so let's say they responded to an ad. I'll just give you a few different industry-specific examples here off the top of my mind. Let's say that they respond to an ad about solar. Okay, we just did a keynote here a couple of weeks ago for a really big solar company out in Carlsbad. So their biggest problems that solar companies are able to solve for the homeowner is to lock in their rate, because utility companies keep raising the rates by 5 to 10 to sometimes 15 or 20% every year. And the prospect has no control over that, yes or no. They just get forced down their throat. And they also want to lower their bill and eventually not have a bill. That's what kind of solar solves. So I want to focus on that when I leave a message. Hey, John, this is just Jeremy Miner with XYZ Company. It looks like you responded to an ad yesterday and asked us to call you back about looking at ways at like locking in your rate and then lowering your bill, your electric bill. And I just had time to get back to you to see if we could help. Now, I'll be available here for a little bit today. You'll have to call me on this number, blah, 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 blah. And like I said, I'll be available here for a little bit. If you don't get me, just text me on this number and I'll text you when I can get back to you. Talk to you then. What did I just do there? Looks like you responded to an ad and asked us to call you back. That would be an example of an outbound lead. Asked us to call you back. So I'm reminding that they asked me to call them back.
Now, why is that important? Why is that important?
Because I have to position myself. You have to position yourself as the expert, as like having the same status as the prospect. If I don't say you asked me to call you back, like I'm flipping the script on them. I'm not chasing them. I'm doing them a favor by calling them back because they've asked me to do that. So when somebody responds to an ad, they're asking you to call them back. That's why they put in their name and number, and they're asking somebody to call them back. They might not know who is calling them back, but you're saying you responded to one of our ads, asked us to call you back about looking at ways. So solar example, about looking at ways to lock in your rate and lower your electric bill. Okay. See how I'm already getting them into thinking results-based thinking. So now there's a reason for them to call me back, lock in their rate and lower their bill. See, that's what I'm selling, the result of what solar does, not solar itself. Now, the same thing I could do in another industry, like life insurance. Looks like you'd responded to one of our ads about looking at possible financial protection for the family for when you do pass away. And I just had time to get back to you to see if I could help, blah, 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 blah. Possible financial protection or looking at at more financial protection to protect your family for when you do pass away, not if with that industry, but when, because that's one thing that just when, it's not if you're going to pass away. Now they have a reason. Now they're like, oh yeah, that's a life insurance policy, so what I can protect. See, I'm already getting them to think results based. So there's a reason why they call me back. Because when I would leave a voicemail on outbound leads, I'd quite literally get half of those people to call me back, if not more. And people are like, how are you getting people to call you back? I'm getting like 5%. Well, it's all in your message. It's the words you're using. Like if, let's say if you sell business consulting to companies, SMB companies, to help them scale, and your company, builds their operations and systems, it's the same thing. Looks like you'd responded to one of our ads and asked us to call you back about looking at possible outside help with like your systems and operations to scale your company to make more money. And I just had time to get back to you. To scale your company to make more money. See, that's what I'm selling in that industry. I'm not really selling them operations. I'm selling them the results of what that does for them, which is to grow, to scale their company, and make them more money. You with me?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Let's go back to that question where I was asking, like, what would you do, I guess, in between calls from a languaging standpoint and maybe a frequency of context standpoint to make sure that people are, especially I think that B2B environment, sales cycles can extend. Like, how do we keep the interest going, and how do we make sure that we don't come off as salesy? Because I think that's the real issue people have with that kind of thing, is how do we not come off as chasing them?
Yeah, because maybe you do a good job on the discovery call, you've lowered their guard down, there's trust there, you've moved to the next step, but then you start like emailing them weird stuff and like getting all salesy and super needy, and then they ghost you, right?
Yeah.
So what you want to do, with that type of environment, is you have to get them to we call those micro commitments, or NEPQ micro commitments, right? So instead of asking like a commitment question, like if you're in B2C, and it's a one call close, you're asking them a commitment question at the end to close them. Like, do you feel like this could be the answer for you? And you go through that and you're asking a commitment question. Well, commitment questions can also be used to make smaller commitments. We call those, like I said, micro commitments that lead to the ultimate commitment of purchasing what you're offering. So that micro commitment might be the next step demo. Then it might be the next step meeting the department head. Then it might be the next step meeting the board. See, you're always getting micro commitments from them. If you get off a call with, let's say, one decision maker on that first discovery call or second demo, and you're like, okay, well, hey, go back and talk to them. And let's say the prospect says, yeah, I'm going to go back and talk with Harry and I'll get back to you in the next week. That is over 90% of the time, because there's no micro commitment from them. You don't know when they're calling. There's no scheduled appointment. Life happens, business happens, things go wrong in their business, and then all of a sudden they forgot about little old Jeremy or little old, Nancy or whatever. Yeah. So you always want to have that next scheduled appointment, and then micro commitments of what they're doing in between the appointments. Okay. And depending on what you sell, you might be sending them some information on this and how this solves that. After you go through the demo, then you send over the recording, or you send over like the next step. You've already got a next step to meet Nancy in their department head to go over something, right? And in between, you're sending them, more details, more information that they're going through to make sure they show up to that next appointment.
What's the main reason why most B2B or business to enterprise companies have such a long sales cycles? Like, I speak to, our clients all the time when they first start and they're running a SaaS company and they have 9 to 12 month sales cycles. And it just seems like, it seems maybe I'm naive, but it seems like that's just a lack of those commitments, a lack of those next steps, and control of the process.
They're missing parts, obviously, that extends the sales cycle. And typically in large enterprise sales, you're not going to have like a 1 or 2 call close, just because there's so many layers, right? It has to go to this department head. Then, this person has to sign off on it. Then the board has to agree to it. Then it maybe goes to legal. That could take 2 weeks. So it typically is 9 months. Good Lord. But not 9 to 12 months, right? So it just depends on what we've taken medical device companies that had 9 to 12 month sales cycles and took them from 12 months down to maybe 3 to 4 months. And that's because they know the right questions with the right tone that builds a massive gap in the prospect's mind from where the prospect is, their current situation compared to where they want to be. And because they build such a gap, that triggers massive urgency in the prospect's brain and the other decision maker's brain that they want to take action now, not keep pushing it down the road. And so they're the ones speeding up the process within the organization. They're speeding it up through legal. They're arguing with their legal to, we're not going to change this. We got to get this problem solved. We're losing all this money. So because you're building massive urgency, it shortens the sales cycle, sometimes 50, 60, 70%. That's the difference.
Yeah. I think one of the first times that I really saw that in action was actually quite early on. We had a German seatbelt manufacturer. They were a high tensile textiles factory.
Yeah.
And that was like the first B2B deal that me and Marco ever signed.
Yeah.
And they one we had to deal with the German translation.
Yeah.
So we had to figure out how to translate it on German. They all spoke English fluently, but they sold in German. They also sold in Chinese. And so their main competitor was Chinese textile factories, and they were dealing a lot with Mercedes, AMG, and like these really, because they used to create seatbelts and high tensile fabrics. And they ended up with like a 400% growth in gross profit. Yeah. Because they were able to shorten their sales cycle so much and bring it to the attention of like Mercedes that, well, yes, you can go with the cheaper manufacturer of, from this Chinese factory, but what are the possible ramifications of having less than ideal tensile strength in like in the seatbelts? What are the potential ramifications for your customers? And they were like, well, the seatbelts might not be as strong. Well, are you willing to settle for that for your customers? Well, no. Well, why not? And just by asking those extra commitment and those consequence questions, it massively shortened. They ended up just like, we didn't have to work with them very long because they just signed these super long-term contracts.
Yeah.
Like they got everything locked in for like 20 years. It was amazing.
Have you thought about the ramifications of what happens when you start having more fatal accidents from the less strength things or whatever they would say? There's so many different variables I'm thinking in my mind you could ask with consequence questions for that type of product or service.
Yeah, but basically we just told them consequence questions and that was it. That was it.
Yeah,
they were like, we're done. Thanks.
Like, whoa, we're not going to get sued. We're going to spend more money on our seatbelts than we're doing in China. We'll spend twice
$1. Yeah, spend an extra $1 per car.
Yeah,
exactly. Like that's what we're talking about.
Get sued. Yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
Well, I think a lot of it is in enterprise sales and even SMB, especially enterprise. Most salespeople don't know how to effectively navigate through an organization because the prospects shut them off from being able to do that because they sound so salesy. They sound so robotic. They sound so unnatural with their question. They sound scripted that when they ask, like, besides you, John, who's the decision maker on this XYZ project? Oh no, I'm good. I'll just go tell them. I'll talk. See, they just shut down because they just stay surface level. So, when you get them to go below the surface, they're willing, like, okay, but who? So just so I understand your company's decision making process, who besides you would be involved in making these type of decisions to solve these problems? Just so I have more context. Well, first I need to talk with Jim over in this department, and then he's going to go over to see, and then I'm starting to get a picture of like who the other influencers and decision makers are, and I know I have to get them on board. I can't just rely on the C-level executive to hopefully sell everybody else, right? The average company has almost 7 decision makers now. So I don't want to take the chance of like selling one decision maker out of 7 and then I hope and pray the other 6 are going to be on board, because you start doing that, you're going to miss 90% of the deals you could be making. That's a big reason why sales cycles keep going too long too.
Yeah, and I think just salespeople not having a dedicated outcome, which is why when I learned NEPQ, it was so helpful to me, because I could just go like, well, I have to get my connection, my connective, my situation, my problem, my solution. I have to get my consequence, my commitment, so I can effectively make my presentation. Yeah. Right. So like no matter what I'm selling, I can just break it down in my mind into those. And it's like I have an outcome for each phase. And sometimes if it's a really big organization, I might go through the entire thing except for presentation 4 times with 4 different people to work my way up the chain.
Yeah, you have to build the gap.
Yeah, I'm selling that person into allowing me to talk to the next person, into allowing me to talk to the next person. And I have to find out what their outcome is if I'm allowed to get all the way up. And if it's status, okay, well, what would the potential ramifications be if you let this
Yeah.
problem slide, you don't
Yeah.
fix it, and it comes rolling downhill that you're the one who was the bottleneck to stopping the business from saving $4 million a year. Oh, well, I mean, Jesus, that would be,
Yeah.
so, like,
Because
okay, let's move you up.
each decision maker might have a different reason why this is going to solve their problem. You can't just assume that the first C-level executive, the problems they said, is going to be the way the department head thinks, because they might be thinking something different. They might not be, the CEO is thinking about the bottom line and ways to, make more profit, whereas the department head is thinking more like, how's this going to help me get promoted? So like you have to come in with different angles. And if you don't, and you just go through a presentation, a demo with other people, you're just taking a chance and hoping and praying that something you said is going to stick with them. And you just don't want to hope and pray. It's not a great way to make a living in sales.
Exactly.
Don't take that hope drug.
And if they want to stop smoking that hopium, where would they find more information about?
If you want to stop taking the hopium drugs, just go to we'll start you guys here in our free Facebook group. We'll give you some more nibbles in there. We'll give you some more dirts. Go to salesrevolution.pro. Should be a link here, salesrevolution.pro. I think 50 some thousand people in there. And we go live in there 2 or 3 times a week, different Q&As, different trainings. And then you want more advanced training, like our clients who are in your industry that are probably crushing you, making 2, 3, 5 times what you are now. You just message us in there and we'll give you some different training options for your industry if you want to make a lot more than you are now. Matt, thanks for that. See you guys soon. Stay out of trouble.
Thanks, guys.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed these, here's another you can watch right over here. Join our free Sales Revolution group. Click the link below, join us, and we're going to help you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you real soon.